Hello and welcome to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt. Addison Michael Plant is with me and we're going to discuss Luis Diaz and Alexander Isak. There's only really two stories going on for Liverpool at this moment in time and we're going to dive into both of those across the course of the next half an hour or so. Before we get into today's episode, a word for our sponsors, NordVPN. They've got a new app available for download, which allows you reliable and affordable internet access on your trips abroad. Saily is a new eSIM service app. It's brought to you by the creators of NordVPN. And here you can choose from several affordable eSIM data plans in over 200 destinations. With Saily's eSIM, you'll always have a connection when you need one. You can download Saily in your app store. You can use our code BLOODRED at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For more information, please go into the episode description box below for further details, or you can visit saily.com/bloodred. Right, let's get into the episode, Michael. Luis Diaz, it appears, is going to be heading to Bayern Munich. As we record it, he's actually still with the Liverpool squad, but we expect him to make that trip and go and undergo his medical examinations at some point in the next day or so. £66 million is what it works out as, 75 million euros. I suppose that the first place to start really is that sounds to me like a decent price for the Colombian.
Yeah, I think so. Just discussing slightly beneath the value that Liverpool seemed to have 2 weeks ago. But I do agree that 66 million for a player approaching 30, 2 years left in his contract is a good price. I think in general it's a transfer that there are pros and cons of. I think that ultimately Liverpool have probably made the right decision in letting Diaz go because, for the reasons I've just mentioned there, and ultimately the player did want to move on. If you get a buyer at a good price, it probably makes sense to allow Diaz to depart. And particularly when Liverpool do have options and plans elsewhere in the market, that you're getting a pretty significant fee that you can reinvest back into the squad. So look, it does make sense. And I think Liverpool have probably done the right thing. And ultimately they have tried and failed to agree a new contract with Diaz. We know that twice the club and the player sat down and couldn't find a middle ground. So yeah, as I say, I think it makes sense. But I do, the two worries that I suppose have from a Liverpool perspective would be, one, that they are losing an immensely talented player who played a huge part last season in the title-winning team. Only Mohamed Salah actually played more games in all competitions than Diaz, which underlines how important and how versatile I think he was for this Liverpool team. And ultimately, it does leave them in a position now where they only actually have two wide attackers, or two senior wide attackers, with the squad in Japan at the moment. Obviously, Salah, Gakpo, you've got Rio and Gamoa, who I think could play an important role this season. You've got Federico Chiesa, but we expect him to leave. And then you've got a smattering of other players who can come in and play in the wide areas, but none of them you would say are natural wingers. So look, I think it's a positive transfer in terms of fee and moving on a player who wanted to leave, but it does leave Liverpool with issues in the transfer market that I think they need to address.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the contract attempts. We know that Luis Diaz has explored his options in the past. I think last summer there was a little bit of interest. I think there was some speculation at the time that even Manchester City might have been interested in him. Barcelona, we suspect, is the dream move for him. Obviously, Bayern is a good one as well. But, I mean, for Liverpool to make a £23 million profit in the end plays into the fact that I think this is a good deal for all parties as well. I fully expect Luis Diaz will go to Germany and really impress. I think he's in a period of his career where he's just come off the back of his best and his most productive season for Liverpool. Clearly still has a lot to play for, but Liverpool didn't pay a huge amount for him in January of 2022. He's spent a significant amount of time out injured in that period as well. He's been at Liverpool. He's a weird case, I think, almost, in that this move could be a success for him, in that he gets the move and he gets a change of scenery. It's probably a good deal for Liverpool when you look at the contract situation, the age, the fact that they can go and reinvest that money elsewhere. It's probably a good move for Bayern as well, to get a player who is in the prime of his career, who will come in and probably make an instant impact. It feels like this could work for all parties for me.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. And I think the value and the money aspect of it, I mean, financially, it makes complete sense to move a player on, as you said, for a profit, having had him for 3.5 years. It's a balance, isn't it? Because he is in the prime years of his career. He's also approaching 30. So I suppose you would say he's at the latter stages of his prime years of his career. And listen, he's contributed an awful lot to Liverpool in that period. Won domestically everything he could win. Really did actually come up with some big moments as well last season in the title winning season. And as I say, it was just a reliable player that could be called upon to do a number of jobs, and you always knew you were going to get a kind of a 6, 7 out of 10 out of him. I actually think particularly in the last maybe 2 months of the season, he was really impressive, but actually potentially the best player. And there was that period, wasn't there, where Liverpool didn't have many games, and then they had the international break after the Carabao Cup final, and then they came back, and I think they had a stretch of 9 games to wrap up the title. And I think he was one of the best players in that period. So, yeah, listen, he will be a loss to Liverpool, absolutely, and I don't think anyone will dispute that. I suppose the big question is just where does it leave them now in the transfer market? I'll maybe throw that one back to you and see what you think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're going to discuss Alexander Isak in a little bit more detail, and I suppose he will be the obvious link. People will put 2 and 2 together and think, well, one of these players has gone. The other one surely is going to come in. I don't think it's necessarily as simple as that. But I also think that if you sell Luis Diaz, I think you've probably got to bring in another left winger as well. We know that was a big strength. A big thing for Arne Slot seems to be that he wants 2 players in every position. And I think both Cody Gakpo and Luis Diaz last season benefited. It's no coincidence, I don't think, that both of those players had the best season for Liverpool under him, because they were both playing in that position. It's their best position. Obviously, Diaz played a little bit through the middle as well. But when there was that competition for places, we saw the best out of each of them. They had to put in that extra 5% to make sure that they were in the team. I think we're going to see that replicated at right back, for example, with Jeremy Frimpong and Conor Bradley. At left back, they've now got 3 options. They've got depth in lots of positions all the way across the pitch. And I think you need to replicate that as well on that left wing. So for me, they do need to sign a winger. Who that is going to be, or whether they will go and do that, it remains to be seen. But I think we spoke at length, didn't we, last week about the number of options that the Liverpool need to have. For me, if they end up with less options than last season, and the one less is Federico Chiesa, that's fine, because he didn't play much, and it wasn't particularly influential in terms of what Liverpool did last season. But if they were to lose one of the other 5 and not replace them in terms of another body coming in, that would be a little bit of a concern for me. So I suppose that the key to what happens next might be Darwin Núñez. If Darwin Núñez goes, then that maybe unlocks another option to go and bring somebody else in. But they've obviously signed Ekitike. We'll talk about Isak. Florian Wirtz, maybe you could put into that forward conversation. Obviously, that's where he played over the weekend against AC Milan in basically what was a front 2 of him and Harvey Elliott. I suppose it depends on 2 things, doesn't it? It depends what happens in terms of other sales. It also depends on where Florian Wirtz is going to end up. So I would like to see another winger come in. But as we spoke about last week, suddenly that looks like a big turnover in terms of numbers, doesn't it? If you're losing all but Gakpo and Salah, as we said last week, that's a lot of change in one summer.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, there's a separate conversation about what this team are going to look like this season compared to last season. I mean, I've touched on it in previous weeks, but it is going to be different. And that is going to be underlined just by the number of changes in the squad. But yeah, what I do think, Liverpool are financially in a really good position, and they have the resources and wiggle room in terms of PSR to go out and make big additions in the transfer market. As you said, we'll come on to Isak, but in a scenario where Liverpool get Isak, they also bring in a centre back. You do start to wonder whether there is enough kind of headroom to go and add another winger, and then you start to wonder whether actually could that reframe and change how certain players are looked at. I mean, is there a possibility of Federico Chiesa being integrated to the squad? I think that's very, very unlikely, to be honest. I think what's more likely is someone like Harvey Elliott or Ben Doak, 2 players who there's a lot of interest across in the Premier League. Across the Premier League. Could they be now suddenly deemed, well, they actually probably need to be a part of things and part of the plan? So that is part of the question. But I do think what is becoming more and more clear throughout the summer is that Arne Slot, he does seem to be signing players who, and thinking of players who can play in multiple positions. I mean, Frimpong's an obvious one. He signed as a right back and has pretty much played as a winger throughout pre-season. Okay, look, that might be because he just needs to try and get, fit everyone into their systems to just get minutes in their legs. But, Ekitike was signed as a player with a thought that he can play up front, he can play deeper, he can play wide. Szoboszlai's played in a wide area. Even seeing Kostas Tsimikas play at centre-back, again, it might be needs must to a certain extent, but you do wonder whether that is starting to influence Slot, that actually he wants players who can play with a bit more versatility and can play across a number of positions. And yeah, I do think that is influencing his thought, but I think Liverpool, let's assume that Núñez and Chiesa also depart alongside Diaz. I think Liverpool need to go and sign 3 more players in the window, which is an incredible thing to say considering they spent the guts of £300 million this summer. But there's still work to do, really.
Would those 3 players be a centre-back and then 2 for the forward line? Is that the way you were thinking about it?
Yeah, I think a striker and a winger, yeah.
Yeah. In terms of that then, there's not really been a huge amount of names linked or anything like that, but let's say it was Isak and Ekitike as number 9s. You've then got Salah and Gakpo on either side. Where do you look in terms of that? Because to find a player who is better than Luis Diaz, or to find a player that, Liverpool seemingly have a policy of, if we're going to bother, going to the trouble of spending the money and going after these players, they need to be of a certain level. There's not going to be loads of options out there easily attainable on the market that are better than Luis Diaz, certainly not for a reasonable fee. Is that something that you'd be worried about, or would you think that, Liverpool, obviously, if they're going to let Diaz go, they've obviously got a plan and they've probably got it all under control?
A bit of both. Yeah, I think at this stage we know that FSG, they're always planning, they're always thinking ahead and making plans for how the squad is going to look. And I agree entirely with what you say, that it's not easy to go and find an addition out wide. Some of the names that have been linked this summer, like Anthony Gordon, it's going to cost an awful lot of money again. I don't know how willing Newcastle are going to be to negotiate on that one as well.
Go down well.
No, it wouldn't. It really wouldn't. Rodrigo, Real Madrid's been mentioned, hasn't he? That would be a colossal fee again, you suspect. The other one that has been linked quite a bit this summer is Malik Fofana. Well, now he's being linked with the move to Everton. So it's not going to be an easy one. And I do think, in that scenario that you outlined there with essentially 2 number 9s, then you got Gakpo and Salah out wide, I think you can have a situation where perhaps Ngamola is a bit of a backup player and is drifting in and playing his kind of part, and there's maybe a bit more somewhere in between, maybe not as reliable as a Salah and a Gakpo, but maybe not as inexperienced as an Ngamola, and somewhere in between that could potentially work. Then you've got the other players I mentioned, Frimpong, Szoboszlai, Ekitike, who can all play out wide. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts still, and look, we're recording this on Monday. There's 5 weeks to go in the transfer market. There's going to be plenty happening still. But there's still a lot of time, and I still think there will be quite a lot of moves in and out of Liverpool, really. Yeah,
as you were talking then, I was thinking part of my high bar for a winger, Liverpool always tend to look for wingers that score high volumes of goals, but I suppose that doesn't necessarily have to be a key factor. If you've got Salah, Florian Wirtz and Alexander Isak in your starting 11, you maybe can afford to look for a player who's maybe more focused on the assists and the creativity from the left-hand side, give you a little bit of a different option. I suppose that is one element of it that might make it slightly easier that I hadn't particularly considered. We've never really seen Liverpool have an attack which is more focused around a number 9 rather than around Mohamed Salah. Now, I'm sure if Mohamed Salah was listening to this, he would probably say, well, that's not going to be the case. It's still going to be him. But I think there will, to some extent, be a shift in that number 9. We might as well move on, given that, to Alexander Isak. We spoke, obviously, about him last week as well, but it does sort of feel like the story has developed a little bit since then. The facts are he has not gone on Newcastle's pre-season tour to Asia. Eddie Howe is going to keep being asked about him. He was asked on Saturday and he was asked on Sunday. And on Sunday, he said there was no chance that Alexander Isak was going to be joining his teammates in Asia. He's going to stay back. We know as well that Liverpool have made an inquiry prior to that. Newcastle's stance at that point was that he wasn't for sale and they didn't want to lose him. But it does feel like there are maybe a few glimmers of hope really for Liverpool, that we know that they've got the money and they are prepared to go down that route. But I suppose it all stems back to what Newcastle do next, really. It's all in their hands at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately Newcastle have got to be willing to sell the player, which up until this point hasn't been the case all summer. And if Liverpool could have signed him 2 weeks ago, I think they would have, and perhaps Hugo Ekitike would now be a Newcastle player, which is a bit of a strange kind of reversal. Who knows? And I do wonder whether Ekitike or whether Isak's, I suppose, move in the market and like, who knows really what's going on. But there certainly seems to have been a certain element of this that has been driven by Isak in terms of trying to make a transfer happen. Maybe he's left it a little bit too late. Perhaps he should have done this 2 weeks ago, and then Liverpool perhaps could have got something over the line. But I do think that, and this is it's been a complete reverse. I listened back to the podcast after you and I did it last week and said I can't imagine a world in which Liverpool bring in Ekitike and Isak. I now very much can't imagine that world because of just how much it's moved on. Clearly, Isak wants to move. Liverpool like him. They have the resources and the finances. And he feels like a player to me. Can you afford to miss out on an opportunity of signing a striker who could go and be, your leading number 9 for the next 5 years, 6 years, 7 maybe? I think it's one that they've got to seriously consider doing if it becomes available. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, very, very similar to you, really. I wrote something overnight, which is on the Liverpool.com website around that, and tied in some things that Fabrizio Romano has been saying as well in terms of that opportunity. I think is the key word. That has always been the key word with Richard Hughes. Opportunistic opportunities in the market. Liverpool will go after if they are there to be had. Now, we don't know whether Newcastle are going to stop that from being the case, and they may well be stubborn, and we know that they're determined, or they have been determined up to this point at least, to make a bit of a point of we're not a selling club and we don't want to lose our best player. But it is interesting, isn't it, that it does appear to be either he will stay at Newcastle or he will go to Liverpool. It doesn't really feel realistic that he's going to end up in Saudi Arabia. I don't think that was ever something that a player of his age and quality should be thinking about. But, Arsenal have gone for Victor Gyökeres, and I suspect they probably couldn't go for Alexander Isak as well. Maybe a couple of months ago, that might have been different. If Isak was pushing for a move then, maybe they would have come to the table. Obviously, Chelsea have spent a fair bit of money on strikers and they've kind of settled. Real Madrid don't need anybody. Manchester City don't need anybody. PSG have settled on this way of playing where they don't really have a number 9. They've gone a different route. There's not really any other option on the market that I think makes sense for Alexander Isak. So if Liverpool can do it this summer, it's obviously not going to be an easy deal to do, but it feels like if ever there's a time to do it, it's probably now when nobody else is really in a realistic position to go for him as well. I mean, you mentioned the finances there. I think that will remain the case, that Liverpool will have that money available to spend, whether that's this summer or next summer. They're not going to be in a vastly different situation. But let's say, the end of the window comes, Isak is still at Newcastle, he does one more season. By next summer, maybe other clubs could join the queue as well. And suddenly, if we think it's a difficult deal to do now, maybe next summer it might be even more difficult.
I think that's a brilliant point. That's why it feels like that this moment that Liverpool maybe do just need a strike and need to realise what an opportunity they've got to try and bring in a brilliant player. And maybe if it does mean that in the short term, one area of the squad is a little bit lacking, but you've brought in this efficient goal scorer, then maybe you have to do it. But I mean, I'll throw back a question to you then that I was just wondering as you were speaking. If bringing Isak in means that you miss out on adding a winger or a centre-back in the market, would you do it?
A winger, yes. A centre-back, I think, is a big risk. I suspect that Liverpool would have the finances to be able to do both. I think if they were to go for Isak, they'd have to do a centre-back. If it was Isak and a centre-back, but not a winger, I think that way round, I think you could get away with it. The centre-back thing does worry me a little bit in terms of, obviously, Joe Gomez has a minor injury. Don't expect him to be out for long. Arne Slot said he's not obviously going to play in the game on Wednesday, but he doesn't expect him to be out for much longer than that. But I mean, it's only a few weeks since he returned from, I think, a 3-month injury that he had last season. History would suggest that at some point he is going to get an injury. Ibrahim Konate as well has been in a position in the past where he has not had the greatest of injury records. Wasn't the case last season, but you can't afford to take that chance, I don't think. So a centre-back is a must, and I think Alexander Isak is not quite a must, but very much would be a game-changing addition. If they can do those two, and you have to sort of say, well, let's just see what happens on the wing, then, Florian Wirtz can play there. Dominic Szoboszlai might not have an automatic position in the team if he has to play on the left wing here and there for the course of the next season, and maybe you do the winger next summer. I think I'd probably deal on that from this point. What about you?
I think I'd agree. Yeah, I think a centre-back is a must. I mean, in an ideal world, I almost wonder whether Liverpool need to bring in 2 centre-backs. I don't think that's going to happen, but a one centre-back is a must. You rely on Endo maybe the odd time to fill in the gaps, perhaps Gravenberch as well. But I think they can probably just about get by with Salah, Gakpo as the wingers, and then the mixture of players I mentioned before chipping in and playing their parts out wide. I suspect probably Ekitike in that scenario would actually end up being more of a winger, really. Ingamola would probably have a bigger role to play. Yeah, and then Frimpong might play up a little bit further as well. I do think Conor Bradley will start the season as first choice right back as well. So, yeah, there's lots of moving parts, really. And it comes back to that conversation then, or that point that I made earlier, that I think Saul seems to want to have players who are versatile and can play across numerous positions. I think he's even mentioned that in the past, perhaps. So, yeah, but look, as I said to you, there's still a lot of wiggle room to have in the market, and there's still a lot of decisions to be made. And look, there's still 4 or 5 players who could leave Liverpool. I mean, Nunez, Chiesa. I mean, the left back situation has gone very quiet. Robertson and Tsimikas, it wouldn't make a huge amount of sense to have 3 left backs starting the season. You've got Elliott, you've got Doe, you've got Tyler Morton. There's so many players that there's uncertainty about the future still. So, yeah, a lot of decisions to be made, but it comes back to the point that if Isak is available, he's just I think you sign Isak and then you get the centre back situation sorted. And look, if there's not funds for a winger, it's a bit of a shame. But you've got this supreme talent that should make up for it.
In terms of players that Liverpool have already got, then that could fill in. Obviously, we've mentioned a few that could play different positions. The other one, probably the obvious one, it'd be Ben Doak. He's played a little bit in pre-season, and we know there's interest, and we know that he possibly might be interested in playing a little bit more often. But for one season, using Ben Doak as a bit of a backup option, maybe on either flank. Jeremy Frimpong as well. You mentioned, to be fair as well. I think we'll probably see a lot more of him on the right wing than maybe some people are thinking at this point. Between those two, maybe there's enough cover there just to make that stretch, just for, even if it's until January, and then maybe you go and find somebody, or maybe next summer.
Yeah, I certainly see that argument. I think Ben Doak is a good point. He's a player I personally would keep overlooking a little bit, because I just think he's going to go, because he's got so much interest across the Premier League. I think the player himself is keen to move on and wants to play regular football, which, whatever happens, if he stays at Liverpool, that's not going to be the case next season. Although, I think you and I have discussed this before, I think it would be a great training ground for him, really, to go in and be essentially the understudy to Mohamed Salah, and to spend time learning under him, playing multiple and coming in and playing the odd role here and there, perhaps maybe filling in on the left if required. I don't know how much that would play into his skills or suit him, but yeah, and I mean, Harvey Elliott's another one. Obviously, can play out right. Will he still be a Liverpool player in a couple of weeks? I don't know. Szoboszlai, I think you mentioned. Szoboszlai's played there in pre-season, hasn't he, as well? Played there at the end of last season a couple of times out wide. So there's loads of options if Liverpool decide to go with, as I say, 2 recognised senior wingers and then look elsewhere. But there is inherently a little bit of a risk with that all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, isn't it? I think Liverpool want to be fighting on all fronts and want to be in a position where they can make the most. If they can get, Isak and Florian Wirtz in a summer, then that's hugely exciting. But, want to leave yourself short in other positions as well. But I mean, just to finish then, in terms of priorities, Isak and a centre-back, we've said, is there anywhere else that you're looking at in this Liverpool team, or is maybe the next priority after that just to start moving a few of these players on? Because, look, I'd be slightly surprised at this point if Harvey Elliott is still at Liverpool, but I mean, he is at the moment, and he was in the starting 11 over the weekend. Can't rule out that maybe he just says, you know what, let's do another year and see how it goes. There's obviously Tyler Morton. There's players there that Liverpool could still bring in, I don't know, to pluck a figure from the air, 100 million in sales or something over the next few weeks. It's not crazy to think that either.
No, even more than that. If you get Núñez moving on, or you get Chiesa moving on as well, to chuck into those players, it's, there's still that's kind of the point that they're kind of making earlier. There's still a lot of room in this window and a lot of things that can happen. And it's exciting at the same time. I think fans find, well, you and I both know fans find transfers exciting, and it will be. I just think it's intriguing to see what squad kind of we end up with come 2nd of September when the market has shut, and there will definitely be exits, but there will also be at least one or two players that has been reported, and we've reported all summer, that there's a chance they could leave and they will end up staying. Someone like a Tsimikas, Robertson. I wonder Ben Doak a little bit with this scenario you and I have spoken about. Perhaps Harvey Elliott, we don't know, but I think in all this conversation, let's not overlook that Liverpool are in an incredibly strong position. They have taken a squad that was by far the best in the country last season, added real strength to it, albeit there is a chance that one area, I think, potentially we could move into the season and they're a little bit understaffed slightly and a little bit lacking numbers, but they're still in a fantastic position, and I don't think any Liverpool fan would disagree with that, really.
Yeah, and I mean, even if it is a risk that they take in one or two of these positions, A, that risk could pay off, and B, they've probably got a more rounded squad than any other team. You look at, I don't think Manchester City have signed a right back, for example, yet. I might be wrong on that, but there's certain elements of other teams that maybe when we're so Liverpool focused, we forget that not everybody else is in a perfect position as well. But yeah, it's certainly going to shape up to be an interesting few weeks, I think, for us reporting on transfers. You can keep up to date with Liverpool.com's daily live blog and all the rest of the stories on our website, of course. Whenever something happens, we'll be on it as soon as we possibly can be. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things for us to go at across the course of the next month or so. But for this week, I think that will do us for this week's podcast. Thank you to Michael for joining me, for you guys at home as well for watching and listening. And we'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast.